demonstration today uses the Cyanotype printing kit from Bostick and Sullivan, something that you can order online. It comes with two parts. Part A is ferric ammonium citrate, and then part B is potassium ferrocyanide. So with these, you always want to use some protective gear, rubber gloves, safety glasses. So the Cyanotype process is one of a number of what we might call non-silver processes, meaning they're not your traditional black and white photography. And in these cases, you typically coat a paper by hand. And I'm using some, I believe it's Rives BFK for this process, but you can use a variety of things. You could use any sort of paper, even cloth. And the way that this process works is that you take equal parts of A and B and mix them together. For a 5x7, I usually use about 10 drops of A and 10 drops of B. So mix your chemistry together, pour it onto your paper base or support, and then I'm using a sponge brush. What you'll notice here is that you don't want to have any metal come into contact with this chemistry. So a sponge brush can work well. Japanese brushes that don't have the metal in them are good ways to do this. And I spread mine back and forth from side to side, trying to get very smooth and even coverage. And then once coated, take it to let it dry and dry completely. So in the darkroom, we have the advantage of using our screens, but you could also hang this from a clothesline to let it dry and dry completely. It does need to be 100% dry for this to work effectively. Next, think about what it is you want to compose onto your cyanotype. In this case, we're doing plants that are typically growing outside of the art building here and laying them out. Now, I have the advantage also of using a piece of glass to sandwich it with some sponge and a hard surface in the background so I can transport it. Taking it from a dimly lit interior room outside into the sun. So with all of these non-silver processes, they're going to use ultraviolet light, typically directly from the sun, to make your exposures. Depending on the weather, exposure times can vary. So it was overcast when I was doing this. I think my exposure time was close to 10 minutes. However, on a sunny day, it might take just 3 or 4 minutes, but with a photogram like this, placing objects on there, it doesn't hurt to overexpose it. Now, actually what you're looking for is a point at which the chemistry continues to get darker and darker until it actually starts to lighten. It starts to solarize, and that's the point that you're looking for in terms of the exposure if you're watching it. Once brought back inside and you remove your objects, you can start to see that silhouette that's been created. And there is that kind of solarization quality. The outside area has actually started to become lighter. The nice thing that's great about cyanotypes is that all you need to develop them is running water. So here the print is rinsing and developing. If the image is underexposed, it could just totally wash away at this point. That can be very disappointing. However, after a few minutes, you may want to place your print into a small bath of hydrogen peroxide and water. So this is mixed 1:9, 1 part hydrogen peroxide to 9 parts water. And this is a really potentially satisfying part. You can see the image immediately darkens and takes on this extremely deep, rich blue color that in many instances can make your image just pop, especially for something like this. After the hydrogen peroxide, you want to rinse that print and make sure you're trying to get as much chemistry out of the paper as possible. It could be maybe up to 10 or 15 minutes. Then there you have the end result, ready to go and to dry on the screens. Now, another thing to consider is something more than a photogram. That could be the possibility of using a digital negative. So that is taking an image taking it to Photoshop, converting it into a negative, and printing it onto a transparency. Now there are some technical steps to make that happen, but instead of using an object, now we have the ability to take a photographic image, create this negative out of it, and again, kind of repeat the same process, laying it onto our completely dry, coated cyanotype paper, taking it outside to expose into the sun. If you're efficient, you can usually run a couple of these things at the same time. Here you can see my photogram along with the digital negative at the same time. Now, a key issue for the digital negative is the exposure time needs to be very, or at least pretty close to the correct exposure. If you don't, the image is way too light. If it's overexposed, the image comes out too dark. I was pretty, I would say, lucky in this exposure, just from some experience putting it into the water to develop and rinse off. And you can see the image start to appear. So this was a photograph I had taken of a bicycle, of all things you could imagine. And here then moving it over to the hydrogen peroxide. That image just instantly pops. Now it could take some experimentation to get this exposure looking just right. You might need to add to or take away a few minutes from your exposure time outside. Once through the hydrogen peroxide, again, you'll want to wash your print, and something perhaps, around 10 minutes may be appropriate. However, I have noticed that increasing or decreasing washing time may cause your print to be lighter or darker. A little bit less washing, it might stay darker. If you need to lighten your print, maybe wash it a bit longer. And once again, you need to allow that print to dry. A lot of people enjoy non-silver processes in part because simply all you need may just be the sun. And these prints onto watercolor paper can also allow you to experiment in different ways. You could paint, draw, cut, sew, and do all sorts of additional things to adjust and manipulate your image.